close that window. Awesome. And then also, this is going to be recorded too. So I think I'll pass over a link to Tina to be able to share with anybody who wasn't able to attend today as well. So hello, welcome to a webinar about the intro to Netlify. We're going to talk about continuous deployment, which is a really awesome term that's actually picking up steam. It's also tied in with continuous integration, which is another buzzword about pushing stuff up to Git basically and having your site maintain just from Git and deploys to GitHub. I work for a company called Netlify. My name's Brian, by the way, Brian Douglas. I do front-end code mainly for Netlify, but I just also do a lot of like speaking engagements, podcasts, meetups, etc. Actually met Tina through a conference last year, Lesbians Who Tech, actually, who we both were on a panel about boot camps and met her. Awesome program. I love Mother Coders. I love what you guys stand for. And I love the fact that there's an avenue for more and more people to have opportunity to learn how to code. But Netlify, so a brief description. Netlify is a platform that integrates and automates all services needed for deploying and maintaining modern websites. And what that means is that modern websites that are Git integrated. So Git is the version control solution that most modern websites are using nowadays. There were other tools back in the day like SVN and Mercurial, which I say back in the day, but it really is like two to like 5 years ago. People were still using those pretty heavily. But Git has kind of reigned supreme based on the choice of version controlling for your websites. The other thing that's become popular, even more popular in the last couple of years, is dynamic JavaScript. So modern websites tend to have a lot of JavaScript that handles a lot of client-side either animations or even APIs and tools. And then another thing that's also been becoming popular in modern websites is build tools, which I can talk briefly about at the end, but I won't go more in too much detail if you haven't seen some of these terms. Not necessary for web development, but modern websites are tending to use build tools, and they tend to make your bundle of your website a lot smaller. So for people who are not viewing your website on a LTE connection, possibly a 2G connection somewhere in another country, it makes it a lot easier for them to be able to see your website. And then the final thing I mentioned a little bit, but APIs, so things like adding and commenting and authentication and login and stuff like that. So, and then Netlify, we bundle all this term modern websites into a term called Jamstack, which the JAMS stands for JavaScript, APIs, and then markup. And those are almost self-explanatory, except for probably markup. Not a lot of people use that term, but markup can really be anything like HTML. A lot of people use some processors like Jade, which is now Pug, and some other things like ERB and Ruby. If you're not familiar with other types of markup, another popular one actually is Markdown is another popular one. But if you're not familiar with all of those, not a big deal because HTML is also markup as well, which we'll all be showing in a moment. And forgot to click through, but yeah, I just kind of described this, JavaScript, APIs, and markups. But I wanted to really get down into that term modern websites and what that really means as well. So I'm just going to break that down a little more. Today we use things like Jekyll and Middleman as far as static site generation. So instead of just starting with a basic index.html, which is totally fine for most sites, you can do static site generation to also handle things like a blog section. So if you have multiple files that you want to section off into a file tree, you could do that with the static site generator. Also things like assets like CSS and images, you could also use static site generation to help organize your project if it becomes a little larger. You tend to start with those projects if you tend to know you're going to use something like a blog or maybe even a restaurant site that has multiple like about pages and stuff like that. Modern websites also include things like front-end JavaScript frameworks like React and Angular. These are basically almost industry standard to use a JavaScript framework for any larger projects. Company websites tend to use a front-end framework, so that's also encompassed in modern websites. The other thing as well is APIs. APIs like Auth0, where you can do authentication, login. Facebook login is another third-party API that's handled through, for the most part, mainly JavaScript. And other things like Discuss for comments and Stripe for payments as well. So that kind of encompasses all of modern websites. So that actually encompasses all the slide talk. Everything else is going to be hands-on. So I'm going to walk you through what Netlify is, how to log in, sign up, and hopefully it all makes sense for you guys. Again, I can't see the chat now, so if you have any questions, maybe something I went by too quickly, I'll cover that in about 10 minutes. So Netlify.com, obviously you can access it through the main website. And actually, I want to see if I can quit my GitHub notifications so I don't get any of those anymore. And basically, here's the Netlify website. We've got some information if you want to find out a little bit more, which I'll talk about in a sec. But this is the brunt of what we actually handle for you. We actually handle like not only just continuous deployment, but atomic deploys, which I'll talk about. We have a CLI as well if you want to do a command line deployments. And then we also have SSL, and then some things that aren't listed like custom domain as well, which is not something that all hosting solutions come out of the box. So signing up for Netlify is pretty simple. All you really need to do is, I prefer to sign up through a login through GitHub, but you can also sign up through email. I'll show you GitHub, and I'll be the only one I'll show you for the main reason that we're just going to focus around GitHub. I think GitHub might be the most popular choice of login solution. And then once you log in, all you have to do is find the repo that's on GitHub. So for those, I don't want to make too much assumptions on how much GitHub you guys know, but in my GitHub, I actually don't want to show you that GitHub. I actually have another GitHub account that I will show you. It has a little less going on. And so I have a project here that's called Mutual Fund. I do have this already on the URL, but I'll show you how to get that there eventually. But this is a basic index.html site. So I'm just going to show you logging in through that site, which I'll show you now. So once I log in through GitHub, I can then link through to an actual repository, which this has search. So I'm just going to go ahead and search for that same project that I showed you. And the next step here in the sign-up flow is building your site. Since I just have an index.html, I don't have an actual separate directory or build command I need to know. So I'm just going to go ahead and click skip all that inputs and go ahead and build my site directly. And once Netlify actually has like Docker containers in the background that actually is going to build your site for you. And as you can see, it's actually already done. The site. And there it is. So this is actually my site that I used back in the day to host meetings for people who want to learn how to code. You just schedule a meeting with me and I'll walk through code, anything you want to do, we pair a program. This site's still up and running, but now I've got it hosted on Netlify. And what's happened actually is Netlify has actually created a unique URL for me. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like here. So this is a Netlify dashboard that I just skipped by. These are all some other sites that I have deployed. I've got a lot of sites. I'm kind of out of the norm. I tend to create a lot of projects and test a lot of things through Netlify. So I've got 5+ pages of sites. But this is a site that we just deployed. And this is the settings dashboard. Now, if you notice that I actually have Antique Dealer Austin, it's a randomly generated string to have a unique ID for your Netlify site. So if you wanted to view your site, you could also click on the image, view your site live. And then you could also see that my GitHub project is actually associated with that. Now, this talk was a lot about continuous deployment, and the beauty of continuous deployment is that every time I make changes on my GitHub, my changes actually go live. So here you notice that I have like welcome to Mutual Fund. I am not too crazy about that. I actually want to change that to welcome to something else. So not super realistic, but since I already have it connected through Git, I'm going to find my index.html, and then I'm going to find the word welcome to Mutual Fund. So I know it's on line 52. Normally, you'd probably do this on your own machine in like a text editor, but GitHub, you can actually edit locally in GitHub. So I'm just going to go to do that since it's just a simple change. And then I know it's on line 52 because I just found that. So looks like for some reason, okay, it looks like I'm actually on my GitHub pages branch. So let me actually show you exactly what happened there. I have a welcome to the mutual fund, but I actually deployed. Here we go. I deployed the master branch. So Netlify actually lets you choose which branch you want to deploy from. So I'm going to make a quick change so I can show you that change that's already been made, because I apparently made that change before this talk and I forgot. So here we are. Since I made that change to deploy, I can then go ahead and trigger a manual deploy. I apologize on the syntax, the CSS that's broken. I'm actually using the Canary branch of Chrome, and some of our CSS is not doesn't port over to the latest and greatest version of Chrome, which is the nightly builded one. So since I already made that change on GitHub and I changed my branch to that branch, I now have welcome to the mutual fund. And I didn't actually have to do anything except change it on GitHub and then change it onto, then trigger another deploy. The nice thing about this is, since now my default branch on GitHub is the proper branch that I was expecting, I can now make that change like I was expecting. So now I have welcome to the mutual fund. So I'm just going to change this to something that's a little, there's chat. So I'm just going to change that to welcome to the Mother Coders chat. And down here in GitHub, simple, if you haven't made changes directly in GitHub like this, once you edit your file, just go ahead and commit the changes. I could just go ahead and change the commit to change title message, and then that will show up in my commit history. And then once that happens, I'll actually trigger another deploy. GitHub pages. Here we are. The deploy actually was too fast for me to catch it. But I'll show you another site, and it'll be a little bit slower so we can actually see the deploy logs. But now we should have live on Netlify, welcome to the Mother Coders chat. That's pretty much Netlify in a nutshell for continuous deployment. We have some other bells and whistles, but for the meat and potatoes of what we do, that's that in a nutshell. Now, this name here, Antique Austin this randomly generated string, is probably not super ideal to have as a website name, especially if you have like some sort of portfolio project, or you're helping a restaurant or a law firm with their website. I don't think that would be recommended to have that there. So I'm actually going to change my site name, which you could do here. So here in the Netlify dashboard, in your site settings, I could actually change this. And again, apologies on the CSS that's broken. I could actually change this to mutual.netlify.com, which now if I go ahead and share this publicly, if I go and throw this on Facebook and tell like my mom or my family about the site that I just created, now I have a more presentable, I guess, to say URL to share. So now we have mutual.netlify.com, and this changes pretty much automatically for you. So I can actually change this anything I would like to, but I prefer to keep that to mutual. Another thing that's actually really cool is that right here in the site in the dashboard, you can actually change your custom domain. Now this does take a bit to update depending on what your DNS provider is, but I actually already own mutualfund.xyz. And what I'll do is I can change this. If you are interested in finding out more of how this works, also how this works with your actual domain provider. So I use hover.com. I know a lot of people use Namecheap and GoDaddy. Here you can actually find out a bit more about how to connect that. I've already done the work to connect this, though it's actually still going to take a bit of time to change that. So now it's saved. So hypothetically, I'd be able to go to mutualfund.xyz, but it's going to take a couple minutes for this to change, which is why I actually already did this to another URL that I have, which is mutualfund.io, which you kind of saw before in my GitHub repo. So now once you actually update your domain, you can actually have this work. And there's only 2 steps that actually you need to do once you change the name on Netlify, which is, I will show you here. Spelled Netlify incorrectly. Here we go. My apologies if my internet is getting pretty slow. All right, so custom domains, signing a custom domain. This is the box that we just saw. On your DNS configuration, you'll just need to add 2 things. You'll need to add a CNAME and an ANAME record. And then instead of adding instead of adding example.netlify.com, I would add mutual.netlify.com. If you have any questions of that, we do have a little chat here, right here. And we tend to respond within 2 hours within the West Coast business hours. So if you wanted to add a chat and say, I need help setting up a domain, 20 minutes now, so that's even better. So send us a message and we will reply back with some help, and we can even do even more help with you if you need some. So feel free to do a little chat with that. But for now, I'm just going to go hand wave over that. And let me just go ahead and talk about one more thing, and then I'll move on to another site that I have. So I already went ahead and set this up on mutualfund.netlify.com. I also set my domain to mutualfund.io, which you saw. One more thing that is pretty interesting that you'd probably want to look into is it's SSL encryption. And if you're not familiar with SSL basically, if someone's on the same Wi-Fi network as you, they have the ability to actually see what sites you're viewing. And if you don't have this, on Chrome, if you don't have the lock symbol and it's secure and it's using SSL, then they have the ability to actually view your content. So this is problematic for any sort of site where you have a blog, or even some other sites that you just don't want people to actually know you're doing. Like if you're doing some sort of shopping or Christmas shopping, you don't want your little brother in the other room trying to see what you're looking at. So SSL is actually enabled. It's pretty trivial with Netlify. We actually enable it with a one-click solution. I've already enabled on the site. Again, it's trivial. It's another solution where you can actually just click the box and then it enables it for you. And we enable it. It takes a couple of minutes, which is why I'm not going to show you now. But for example, when I go to mutual fund, this is actually not SSL encrypted, but I can actually go ahead and add HTTPS. And now I'm confirmed that this is encrypted. And again, this is a one-click solution with Netlify, which is pretty awesome. This one little button here, which is forces SSL. So if you want to make sure your users are always using SSL every time they're on the site, you can actually click this button. And then if I try to now, and this might take 30 seconds to actually update, but it looks like it worked. So now if I try to do mutual fund without SSL, it's going to redirect me all the time with SSL, which is super awesome. It's a nice little feature that comes free with Netlify. There's some other solutions for hosting like AWS and GitHub Pages that you don't really get that benefit out of the box. And again, within our documentation, netlify.com/docs/SSL, we even have a video associated with this. So you can actually see and find out more about SSL. So real quick, actually, I think I will go ahead and break for questions if anybody has any questions. I'm not sure if Cool. Yeah, good point, Tina. GitHub, it's nice having your code actually public. Not public, somewhere where you don't have it local on your machine. So I do a bit of mentoring for some students, and I do have a student that goes between his work machine and his home machine. And the fact that he can use GitHub to access his same website from 2 different locations is pretty much the awesome reason for having using GitHub as a solution to host your code. And obviously using Netlify makes it even easier. And then also you don't even have to use the command line for this. If you make all your changes into Markdown, it triggers once you pick your branch, which I kind of glossed over. I apologize on that. But once you pick your branch, it always watches this branch. So it's always going to watch my master branch to make sure that I'm every time there's a change on master, it will update the changes live on Netlify. And there's some other tools, if you look at our documentation, to be able to limit that. So if you don't want your pushes to master to happen until like maybe test pass, or if you don't want your pushes to change for a certain amount of time, we do have an option to lock your deploy. So for example, it's Black Friday, you're helping out. Again, I'll go back to a site for retail operation. Maybe you're selling shoes or handbags, and you don't want to change. You want to make changes to your site, but you don't want to change anything until maybe Monday. You can actually click lock deploy, and it'll actually lock that you unlock it. Alter won't update on the site. So that's a nice little governor that you can add to prevent changes, especially if you want to work in the dark on a new feature or a new login functionality or whatever, or even just a new blog post too. It's a nice way to hide some new blog post that you don't want to actually show up live. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. There's another site that I use a lot, which is a site which is the site for my actual my podcast. So there's a website, podcast episodes, which I treat as, and I've built using a static site generator, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning, which is Middleman. So Middleman, it's a Ruby-based static site generator. If you're not familiar, they have great documentation. There's a lot of videos out there to help you. Another solution is Jekyll. I'm just a big fan of Middleman. So Middleman, basically, they take all your assets, they take your images and etc. links, and they actually present it much easier. Static site generation's really nice to use if you know you're gonna have a larger site like what I have, which is pages and pages of podcast. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start a new site. So I went through the sign up flow. If you wanna add a new project, which I realize I already have this project on there, I could just go ahead and add project here using that button, and then follow the same flow. Of course, you don't have to log anymore because you're already logged in, but I know in my account, I can actually click my developing story repo, and Netlify actually has a really cool backend that actually kind of identifies whether or not using a static site generator. So for the most part, most of them we know about. So if you do have a Middleman file or Jekyll or Hugo or even some, like even React and some JavaScript projects, we'll try to identify your build command. If we're incorrect, which most of the time we're not, I guess that kind of sounds pretty full of us. But yeah, most of the time we're not, to be honest. And we'll actually kind of try to guess your build command for you. And then also where your public folder is. So your public folder is where everything gets built to, where your index.html is. So since I already know this, or sorry, since Netlify already knows this, I can just go ahead and hit build site. And then once you build your site, you're gonna see the actual site being built. Now this is gonna take a couple seconds, so I'll talk through this. But yeah, basically we're just running your build command. So it just ran Middleman build, and now it's going to basically the process of what Middleman would do locally for you. And Netlify just does that every time you push to GitHub. So every time I make a change on my podcast site, Netlify is just gonna go ahead and push a live version of that for me. So there's no need to go to command line, no need to figure out how to get staging working or running up DigitalOcean boxes and servers and all that other stuff. All you need to do is make changes on GitHub, whether you use Git locally or if you use Git on GitHub or Tower or the local GitHub client, and then we'll go ahead and build that for you. So it looks like most of this is built. It looks like it's still building a couple of my older blog posts, but for the most part, it seems like my intro is already up. So there is a chance that some images might not be loaded because it still is building. Actually, it just finished, but here's my site live, and then it also created a randomly generated string for me. So that's the gist of using a static site generator. You can also do this with React, Angular, all those other front-end build tools. But that's the gist of that. There's also one more thing I wanted to show you, and then I'll just stop and take a break for questions, and I'll chat with you guys and answer them live. What's really cool is that not all the time we don't actually have all our projects on GitHub, which we realized that at Netlify. So I have a project, which is going to be the same project that we were talking about, which is a mutual fund project. I have this project, and it's got an index.html here. Pretty straightforward. Don't really need to open that. If I wanted to deploy this project, but I don't have this on GitHub, we do have a drag and drop deploy function. which, as you can see, I did that. What it does is analyze the files. It just looks for that index.html. So wherever you have that in your file, you just want to drop that folder. And then since that's done, you can now see that it's a manual deploy. I didn't talk about this before, but we do have a link here as well as the settings page to be able to see that live. So as you can see, I didn't actually connect this to Git, but I can also deploy folders without using GitHub as well. So there's that. That's really nice. It's a nice little feature, especially if you're just working with the Bootstrap template real quick, editing some stuff. Either you get some, or you get some index.html files from other place, and you don't really want to put it on GitHub, but you just want to get a site live and ready to go real quickly. That drag and drop deploy functionality is pretty on point. So that's actually the completion of the walkthrough for Netlify. We do have some other things that we love to talk about, but I'll leave that for now, just to keep the actual intro short. And then I'll take a break for any sort of comments or questions that you might have. Cool. So I'll just scroll up, and looks like I'll just go up and see if I missed anything. So there is a question: why do I prefer Middleman over Jekyll or Roots? Middleman was the first static site generator that I got into. I just kind of figured it out first. So since I already know it well, I tend to just go to Middleman. Roots is nice. This presentation that we actually started off with is actually a Roots presentation. So I do use Roots. What I'm using. And yeah, but that's basically my preference. Netlify, we actually prefer Hugo, which Hugo is even different static site generator as well. So we make sure, I like to use a lot of different ones to make sure that we work. But Hugo is a lot like Jekyll, and instead of Ruby, it's built on Go. So there's that. Yeah, and if you have a Roots project too as well, we do know what Roots projects are too. So if you do either, if you point your repo to a Roots project, we should be able to know how to build that, which is, I believe, the Roots compile command as well. Generally, the setting up, we kind of walked through it. I kind of talked longer than it took to set up. But once setting up Netlify is pretty easy. Once you click that login with GitHub, it basically takes seconds to connect your project. To deploy the project, it's all dependent on your build command. So as you saw, Middleman actually takes a bit of time because it's a little, I'll be honest, it's a little slower because it uses Ruby. It's actually an older project that honestly, it's kind of slowed down. As far as development, I haven't seen any too crazy new versions coming up in the pipe. But with Hugo, it takes like a matter of seconds. So that's awesome. Yeah, and I guess, Tina, you're saying that use GitHub. If you GitHub is the industry standard. I just want to say that as far as hosting code publicly. So if you want to use if you want to be part of the industry standard, I recommend using GitHub. And as far as deploying, it's pretty trivial setting up. Like, you connect your repo, it watches the repo, it makes the changes for you, it pushes it live. So simplifying version control by eliminating the need to push and stage and commit. So I don't think we still rely heavily, we're integrated, so you will need to, if you're doing it locally, you will need to stage and commit locally and then push your changes to your branch. We do have deploy hooks, which is another, let me go back to the webhooks rather. So we do have incoming and outgoing webhooks. This is a little more technical, but we can push deploys based on changes that happen on, let's say, if you made a change in, now this could get really technical, if you make a change in a Excel document, and every time that change happens, you can connect that webhook with Zapier and make an update to your website based on that deploy. I have not used an incoming webhook in that manner, but outgoing webhooks are actually pretty nice, where you can actually set up a custom notification system that maybe pushes to Slack. But to be honest, that example doesn't make as much sense because we do have notifications that you could actually set up. So every time you make a deploy, let's say you're working in a team, you could actually add a Slack integration. Sorry, I'm kind of talking in circles because I was trying to come up with an example, but then I realized you could actually do my example anyway, because we have outgoing webhooks with notifications. So you can integrate to Slack. You can actually integrate to GitHub. So if you have a pull request and you want every time it deploys to make a comment on your pull request, then you can. Like, for example, you just say, site is live. We can make sure that happens in a pull request using these Git as well. And it looks like that specific one's there. Let's go back to the comments. Yeah, so Netlify is, honestly, it's a lot like Squarespace. We actually are we're not moving in that direction, but we do have a Netlify open source CMS tool, which I did not talk about, which I can kind of show you now, so it's very new. So it's on GitHub. We don't have documentation on it yet. We're going to have documentation very shortly. But we do have a CMS where, for example, I have a blog post. Let me go to one of my blogs so I don't mess up anything. So I do a podcast that I post on Netlify, and we do have a CMS. So if you notice that I logged in really quickly, I just went to /admin for my Netlify site, which netlify.com is hosted on Netlify. We obviously dog food our own product. All of our sites are actually hosted on Netlify, which sounds weird that we can host our own sites, but we technically can. And so actually I can edit my blog post, which I didn't want to talk about too much because, again, there's not a lot of documentation on this. So it's not a lot of work to get set up, but there's a lot of work if there's bugs. So if you're really into actually doing in-browser editing, similar to what I show you in GitHub, once I go to /admin for my site, and I'll even show a different site as well. So my actual blog is hooked up with the Netlify CMS. And then I've already logged in, but then I could also create a post. I don't have any posts pending. So I guess I probably shouldn't have showed that one, but let me show you this one again. So I just log in through GitHub. I can now see any posts that are pending. None of our posts are pending, but what we do is we actually take your post and we open up a pull request on GitHub. So every time I hit save, it will open up a pull request on GitHub and then show my diff of changes. So it's very nice for editorial workflows, like for if you have a couple people working on a blog. For example, if Mother Coders had a blog and a couple of different people were contributing to it, this CMS actually works really nice with that workflow. At the moment, we are maybe weeks away from actually announcing it officially and providing documentation on actually proper setup. But for now, you can actually go to netlify.com/netlifycms, and you can actually set this up yourself. If you have questions, again, our chat, we do support this as well. This is an open source project, but we support this internally. So if you have any problems, either open up an issue on GitHub or use this little chat here and just say you're trying to use the CMS, integrate it with, because we want people to use it, but we just don't have the documentation out there yet to publicly say, go ahead and use it. And then as far as the UI, we're actually going to be upgrading the UI very shortly too. So I'm actually excited. First week of February, we will have a new UI with a little more intuitive things as far as, and also a couple new features too that we'll announce too. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I appreciate that remark about us being like Squarespace, because I love Squarespace. It's a nice platform. I don't understand the question. The platform upgrade breaks all your stuff. Don't know. Oh, okay, gotcha. I guess you were commenting early on. Yeah, if there's any other questions, let me know. If not, this was recorded. So if there was anybody that missed this that you maybe want to share with others, feel free. I will actually, on the same page as the YouTube link, there will be a publicly facing YouTube link. I might edit out the beginning where there was awkward me just staring at the screen. But other than that, I'm excited to have more mother coders actually get on Netlify. Let us know if you have any questions, because we are here to help. We are excited, especially people who are learning how to code or in their beginning stages of their career. We are here to help. So if you have any like general questions about just even using, like you had about roots and middleman, etc., pop in the chat and like ask us about compatibility issues as well. There's a lot of cutting edge features that you can't know everything about web development. So even stuff that comes in our chat, we don't always have the answer for, but we love discovering and finding out what works with us. So let us know. And I really appreciate your time. And it's like either last call for questions. And I'll go ahead and end the talk there. Thank you, guys.